Hello and welcome to Finextra. I'm Emily Horler and I'm here with Ciarán Coyle from Ulster Bank, and we're talking about fintech trends and emerging technologies. Thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you, you're very welcome.
What are the emerging fintech trends and opportunities right now?
I think firstly to look at the fintech trends in the context of the volume of change that our industry is going through right now, unprecedented change, frankly. And a lot of that has been driven by regulation and complex regulation over the last number of years, and more of that we expect in the medium term. But I think it's also fair to say that the trend we're seeing is a lot of the disruption and change and that banks are having to respond to is coming from the outside and coming from outside financial services, and fintechs are playing a really big role in that. I would say that the trend that's most obvious is fintechs are not looking, at least yet, to come and set up full service banks. They're looking to come and observe the segments of the market, the parts of the value chain that they want to really disrupt and become really good at in a deep, capable way. Payments is clearly one of those areas. Peer-to-peer lending is another one of those areas. But it's clearly a trend. They want to come in and take parts of the customer segments and propositions. Revenue, I think, is another trend we're seeing. It's starting slow, but I think it's going to accelerate and become a bigger issue for banks in the medium term. But of course, there are also opportunities. And I think the opportunities we're seeing is collaboration between banks and fintechs in many different guises to produce, develop, and indeed launch better propositions for our customers. And I think generally, both fintechs and banks are on a learning curve when it comes to that, because fintechs are lean, agile, new technology, but banks have millions of customers and very high quality data, and you bring those things together and it can be quite an interesting marriage.
So why are partnerships like this attractive to banks?
I think there's a number of reasons. The most obvious is fintechs, if you find the right fintech in a good partnership with a bank, they bring a freshness and a newness both in technology, the platforms, the capability, the thinking that banks don't have the luxury of because of the legacy technologies and architectures that we have to manage, and customers that we're very happy to have, millions of them day in, day out. So there is an attractiveness for banks in engaging with fintechs from that point of view. I think the other reason is fintechs bring a new way of thinking, design-led thinking, thinking about the customer propositions in different ways that banks want to expose themselves to and collaborate on. And the third one, and I think perhaps for me personally the most important one, is the right fintech partnership for a bank can help over time to transform the innovation culture in a bank by exposing employees, leadership teams with fintechs, bringing them together, making them work together. I think over time that might have the greatest transformational impact of all, actually.
Why is payments such a hotspot for fintech focus?
Well, actually, I think recently I read that 25% almost of all fintechs are payments related. And in a way, put very simply, everybody needs to make payments. Nowadays, everybody's using their mobile phones or their tablets to do that. So you've got a very captive audience. And I think the barriers to entry for payments are generally lower. You've got a high volume of repeatable transactions. And if you're a fintech, it's probably one of the most obvious areas you would go for.
Global banking is in an unprecedented time of disruption caused by rapid change of regulation, customer behaviour and payments. How are we linking these to digital transformation?
I think this is a really interesting point and question, because I go back to the earlier discussion around the volume of regulation, and typically the focus has been about being compliant with the regulation. And of course banks don't want regulation to lead their strategy. But equally, we recognise that we must become better at ensuring that the changes in the investment we're making in regulation is helping progress our overall strategy. And in this regard, the best example I think I would use would be the PSD2 regulation that's coming to banks right across Europe. I think that's going to be the biggest disruptor for both customers and banking that we've seen in a long time. If banks just focus on being compliant, frankly, we miss the entire picture. Open banking, which is going to be, I guess, a consequence of PSD2, forces banks now, I think, really forces banks to think about how are we going to work with third parties? How are we going to use third parties, fintechs and other companies to help design and solve problems that historically we tried to solve within the confines of our own organizations? With customer consent via PSD2, we will be sharing customer data to third parties. And I think this is the best chance and example for banks now to use that regulation as a platform to design and develop the banks of the future. And personally, I think that means banks are going to move more from being separate, perhaps in some ways, isolationist entities to being platform businesses where they think more broadly about the adjacent industries, they think more broadly about the ecosystem that they're part of, and collaboration with the various parties in the ecosystem to design better outcomes for customers. I think ultimately the winner from PSD2 is going to be customers.
So how are banks exploring the possibilities of emerging technologies?
There is no one set of things that any particular bank is doing, but you can see trends, and certainly we can see trends within Ulster Bank and with the Royal Bank of Scotland, which we're a subsidiary. We can see banks collaborating, like we are ourselves, with Dogpatch Labs here in Dublin, incubation hubs, a centre of innovation here in Dublin, that we're very proud of that partnership. And I think I would look at the three key themes that we would relate to ourselves and that we're certainly looking at is, firstly, in the area of artificial intelligence. That whole area of virtual assistants. We are using and investigating and actually actively using with RBS IBM's Watson to understand how we can develop that further. We're very interested, and I think other banks are, in voice-enabled technology for customers. We're also thinking about how we might use distributed ledger technologies. Particularly, we're looking at blockchain, and we're collaborating with some of the other banks in the Republic of Ireland about how we might use blockchain for payments. And then finally, we're also looking at the use of robotics and automation. And there are some customer propositions around that, but ultimately we're looking at how we might use robotics and automation to create more efficient organizations, safer organizations, and create better customer propositions. So those are three areas I think, while we're focusing on them, I think that you would see that trend across the industry. And then finally, I would say what we're also doing is very actively with Royal Bank of Scotland, we're very actively looking at how we engage with fintechs generally. RBS has got bases in Silicon Valley, in London, in Edinburgh, in Israel. We've got our Dogpatch Labs base here in Dublin, and together that exposes us to a lot of new thinking, a lot of new fintechs, and it's frankly very exciting for us. So it's a journey. We're certainly started, and we're looking forward to what opportunities it might bring for us in the future.
Ciarán, thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
And thank you for watching.